I think we can get started. Because we have two presentations, what I'm going to do is I am going to ask everybody to mute and feel free to shut your screen off for your video. That might make the broadband a little easier for everybody. I will take notes. And there's not much else we'll talk about right now. We'll go right into this. And thank you all for coming. I wanted to mention a little bit about the goals of this, though. As we are where we set goals for the Loon Diver Working Group, Stewardship Working Group, for engagement and education, and for standardized marketing and standardized messaging. And this is one of the goals that we chose to look into was wake boats and a standardized messaging around wake boats. And the purpose of this meeting and the next couple, if we can pull everything together, we did this on relatively short notice, so we still have to find speakers for everything. Our goal is to learn the information we need to make that standard messaging that we all can share afterwards. So we'll have these few meetings and then we'll discuss what those messages are going to be. So now I will turn it over to Erica to introduce Mike. And Mike, if you want to go ahead and get your presentation ready, I'm going to set it up so you can share.
All right.
All right. So Michael Engelston served in various roles with Wisconsin Lake since 2009, becoming executive director in 2013. He has extensive experience with nonprofit organizations as staff or as a board member, including the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame, River Alliance of Wisconsin, the Tenant Resource Center of Wisconsin, and Prairie Music and Arts. And I've been going to the Wisconsin Lakes Partnership Convention since I started back in 2011 and met Mike back then. And his legislative updates are key to me. I always attend them and they really help me keep my constituency up to date. And so I'd like to thank Mike for joining us and updating all of us on Wisconsin as well as other places. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Erica, and thanks for everyone for coming. I will do my best to make this at least a little bit Loon centric, but obviously it's a pretty big topic, so there's a lot to cover, and hopefully this will give you a good background sort of in where policy might be related to wake boats. So get my screen so that it will actually advance. Just a quick bit about my organization. We're a statewide nonprofit organization in Wisconsin. We are have individual members that just care about lakes and want to see them clean and safe and preserved. And we also serve as the organization of lake organizations in the state. We obviously promote healthy lakes, we provide education and technical assistance, but then we do advocate for sound science-based lake policy. I used to be an attorney, I'm now a lobbyist, don't hold it against me, but that's sort of where my expertise on all of this comes in. So I'm not as, I'll talk a little bit about some of the studies around wake boats and their impact, but I'm not a scientist and I am not incredibly deeply versed in those, but be happy to answer questions as we go. So to start out with, I have found over the last, I've been working on this issue for 5, maybe 7 years, something like that now. And I find that it's easiest to differentiate between wake sports and sort of the activity and wake boats when thinking about how you approach the, especially in Wisconsin, how you approach the advocacy for it. So wake sports means wake boarding, which is a towed water sport, or wake surfing, which is not towed. Almost any boat with the right equipment can be used in wake sporting. So if even a pontoon boat that has the right kind of foils and some other extra doohickeys added to it can create, I have been told, a pretty decent wake. And in fact, there's a line of pontoon boats now called wake tunes that are designed around being able to both have the pontoon experience and the wake experience. But most wake sports take place using wake boats. Those are the large power boats that I'm sure you've seen before, designed specifically for this purpose. And the way they create the wake generally is with this large ballast tank system. It pulls in a whole lot of wake lake water, weights down the stern. They move at a speed that kind of forces the bow of the boat up, and so that creates the wake. It also pushes a lot of water down towards the lake bottom, so you get these big wakes that can travel for a much longer distance than what would be generated from most power boats. And you also get a water column that's jet that's going down, you know, depending on the depth that you're in, into the lake bed, and that can kick up all sorts of things. Whatever is in there, it can damage habitat, it can cause all sorts of problems. So we, as far as what we look for impacts and where most of the work being done now on studies, and there's studies that have been done all over North America and probably the world. I think I've seen a couple from Australia as well, but both looking at how long it takes for the wake to dissipate, so that when it impacts the shore, it's not really impacting with any greater strength than any other wake. What is happening to all that stuff that's getting kicked up from the bottom? So both how deep do these things penetrate, and then if the lake bed is disturbed, is if there's suspended phosphorus in that sediment, is it being reintroduced to the water column, and how long does it stay there? We have more information probably on the distance from shore question than we do on the depth. The distance, most studies seem to be centering around between 500 and 700 feet from shore. And this is usually to get to the same energy and wave height. So basically the same wave impact as a wave from a boat 200 feet from shore. So it's not that the wave has dissipated entirely, it's that the wave has dissipated to the point where it's no worse than any other powerboat that might be traveling, assuming you have a 200 feet from shore distance, which interestingly, Wisconsin only has a 100 foot from shore distance for powerboats. So it's not always the case. The depth question, there have not, to my knowledge, been any final studies yet. Sort of for both pieces of information in the U.S., sort of the bellwether work that I know of is being done in Minnesota at the University of St. Anthony Falls Laboratory. Jeff Marr is leading a team that has issued a paper already on the distance piece. They are working on phase 2 of their study, looking at depth. Initially, and this was like earlier last year, they had done measurements and they were thinking that it might actually, the depth of impact might be as deep as 25, even 30 feet. I've talked to Jeff since then. They actually discovered some additional variables that they wanted to check and rerun their findings, and they think that maybe it will be closer to what we've had heard from the very beginning, which was around the 20 to 25 foot depth to where it has impact. It's also worth noting that the industry, the boating industry, tells boaters that it's not really worth doing much of this in anything shallower than 20 feet because you don't get a very good wake because it's too shallow. So even that maybe is an indication of what that depth might be. So, you know, that's sort of where the science is right now. So I want to give a quick shout out to another organization in Wisconsin. It's called the Last Wilderness Alliance, lastwildernessaLliance.org. These are all just citizens that kind of came together, wanted to do some work on a wake boat ordinance on their lakes in the Presque Isle area, and went really deep into it. They're engineers, and which I think this poster probably points that it is a product of what you might see, and it's got there's a whole lot of information in this, and it's all very helpful. So you can check them out at lastwildernessaLliance.org. They really have wake surfing and all-terrain vehicles are the two issues that they really are working on in their area, and they've done a very good job and have been a great partner in helping with some of the legislative activities in Wisconsin recently. So I invite you to check them out. So as far as how do you take that science that I talked about, put it into policy? Well, one of the things that we have to worry about in Wisconsin, not worry about, we're happy to have it, is the public trust doctrine. Many of you are probably familiar with it. It's an ancient common law idea that our navigable waters should be kept free for everybody's use. In Wisconsin, it's been interpreted very broadly by our courts and by our lawmakers, so that it really says that our waters in Wisconsin are held in trust for all Wisconsinites, and we have the right to reasonable use of those waters, with restrictions that can be placed on it by the trustees, our government. But really, we have that right to use it, and it includes the right to recreate. So it deeply influences how we can look at regulation of recreational activities like water sports. There's no case in the state that says you can't ban a particular type of boat, but it has largely been assumed that that is kind of would be the case. I'm not sure that's 100% true. I think if some super yacht was tried to be put on one of even our larger lakes, that might not be something that would be allowed to continue. But in general, we try to look at the activity that's happening rather than regulating the boat. So that's one of the reasons that distinction between wake sports and wake boating is so important. So we have really three levels of regulations in Wisconsin. Local ordinances have been around for a while. I'll talk about efforts to get some state statutes going, and then some efforts to do some work at the Department of Natural Resources level. So in Wisconsin, which is somewhat unique from other states in the US, cities, villages, towns, and lake districts, which are small purpose units of government where properties around a lake can form a government. They are a taxing authority. In certain situations, they are allowed to create boating ordinances that can regulate things like whether there can be wakes at all, if there are specific times for slow no wake, regulate days that say water skiing can take place, something like that. That power to do that sort of regulation under the public trust has been delegated to those entities by the Wisconsin legislature, not to entire counties. So usually these ordinances have to cover just a single lake. So it goes just to the municipality. And and that really is in order to sort of preserve those public trust rights so that you don't have a county making a decision for all the lakes and all the communities in the area. It's really the local government making a decision, typically over just one or two water bodies, though there are some towns in the state that have a number of lakes in them that will have passed ordinances that cover all of them. In terms of wake ordinances, they will ban what I usually call them enhanced wakes. Sometimes they're called amplified, sometimes excessive, but anything that is sort of intentionally created for the purpose of using for wake sports. The ordinances will use language like a ban on operating a boat in a bow-high manner to create wakes. So that's where you're putting the weight in the stern to try to create the larger wakes. Sometimes they cover whole lakes. Sometimes they will, there will be a ban on the entire lake, so you can't do wake sports at all. Some ordinances say that you have to stay some distance from shore or something like that, following some of that science that is coming up. And then we have usually have some prohibition of the use of wake creating tools. And that kind of gets into how you regulate the activity. Rather than say you're going to not allow the boat, you say you can't allow the use of foils or fins or ballast tanks to create these wakes. That also covers situations where it's not a wake boat that would be doing it. So there's maybe a dozen, 2 dozen local ordinances in the state. None of them have been legally challenged as far as I know. And as one of the attorneys from Last Wilderness Alliance likes to point out, that's probably a pretty good sign that they're safe from too much of a challenge, because if the boating industry wanted to take them on, they probably would have at this point is our thought. Doesn't mean that it won't happen, but long history of local boating regulations in the state. And so that's mainly the way that these issues have been taken care of so far. This year, last year and this year, there was some actions to try to create state standards. None were enacted, and our legislative session is all but over for this year. There will be a new legislature that sits in 2025, so I'm guessing this issue will come up again, but the bills that were introduced this year will have to be reintroduced next time around. And I would break them up into two different types of bills. So one covers sort of, it's the standard type bill. So it includes a standard that has a distance from shore, a minimum depth. Some of them have contiguous acres figures. So if you take out the water that can't be used because of the distance from shore and minimum depth, what's left over? Is there enough space left for wake sporting? The bill that was introduced this session, however, didn't really do very much of that at all. It was only had a prohibition of wake sports within 200 feet from shore, didn't include any kind of depth situation, and it didn't allow for local municipalities to pass ordinances with standards stronger than that. The sort of local control issue, as we call it. And in fact, not only did it prohibit municipalities from going stronger than the state standards, it actually allowed them to pass ordinances that would be weaker than the state standards. So it really wasn't a bill that was creating a minimum set of standards for regulating wakes. It was one that was setting a cap on them. That resulted in a large amount of pushback from hundreds of citizens. We publicized it quite a bit. We did some lobbying ourselves. There were us and Last Wilderness Alliance and a couple other organizations also did some work on this, and it did not pass. There was some movements towards some compromise that would have created some better standards, but we were never able to get to a point where we agreed on anything. So that bill did not pass, and we would consider that a win. And you can see from the slide, my organization's position is we prefer a 600 to 700 foot from shore standard. That's pretty much in keeping with the science, and something in the 20 to 30 foot depth range. We don't have a contiguous acre standard, and I'll talk about that in just a second. The second type of bill, and there was one introduced this session again that didn't go anywhere, and that is a minimum acreage standard. So no enhanced wake on a lake of X acres. In this case, this bill was no enhanced wakes on any lake that was less than 1,500 acres, which of the, we won't get into the politics of how we count lakes in Wisconsin versus other places, but we say we have 15,000. This bill would have only left about 77 open for wake sports at that 1,500 acre threshold. Any other lake of those 77 lakes, the activities could only be undertaken at greater than 700 feet from shore, and also other boats, other structures, other people in the water for safety reasons. That bill, to be honest, really never had much of a chance right from the get-go. It did not have a whole lot of support from other legislators, and so that one has not gone anywhere either. So as I said, we're ending the season really without a whole lot of, with a lot of work, but not a lot of success. Our position, Wisconsin Lake's position, is that no matter what we do as a state, no matter what you do as regulation, the local control piece, the ability for the people around the lake, the users of that lake in whatever governmental structure they have to determine what the ordinance standards would be, is really important, because every lake is so different from another lake that even a 1,600 acre lake is not the same as another 1,600 acre lake because of shape, because of bottom contour, because of cultural tradition. Some lakes are, have forever been fishing lakes, while other lakes are really big water sports lakes where maybe if you can take care of the environmental impacts, wake sports are not going to be really noticed or cause much of a problem. And so we feel it's better to just use the distance from shore and the depth, and then as that will take care of a number of water bodies. And then from there, you can go on an individual basis and decide, do we need to do more than just that? How am I doing on time? I don't want to run too far.
I don't honestly know when you started, but if you want to start wrapping up, that'd be excellent.
Yeah.
I think it's been about 15 minutes.
All right. I've got like 2 more slides then. So the piece that none of this is talked about is the aquatic invasive species problem that can come with these boats. And that's because of and this is moving from the activity to the boat. So the AIS problem comes from the fact that these ballast tanks don't drain entirely. On some models, they can leave up to, I think it's like 8 to 10 gallons of water in the tank. Well, Wisconsin has a law that says you can't transport invasive species from one lake to another. And these boats virtually guarantee that that law is being broken on a regular basis as these lakes move around. I will say that there's not a lot of evidence that they move around as much as other boats. They're big, they're heavy, but they certainly do. And so there have been questions of, can our Department of Natural Resources do anything about it on sort of a administrative rule level, which would be the third way that we can regulate these. There's nothing currently on the books, and there's some question whether the agency actually has authority to do a whole lot in here. But there's a method that in Wisconsin that allows citizens to petition, and what they have, there has been a petition filed, and that would ask for a requirement that a decontamination process to become certified in decontaminating wake boats is created, and then a boat would have to go through that decontamination process to enter a lake, and then would have to be decontaminated again before moving to another lake. That's very similar to a rule that was put into place in Vermont, where they have a much more expansive petition process. There, the citizens were able to get a rule where many lakes were deemed not suitable for wake boating, and there were some distance and depth restrictions put in place. I think it was 500 feet from shore and 20 feet deep. Other places around the nation, the South has some places, states like Tennessee and South Carolina, I think Alabama and possibly Mississippi followed industry recommendations of 200 feet from shore and lakes less than 50 acres. Again, we don't believe that that fits what the science says. Oregon has a unique rule on a small section of the Willamette that would that restricts wake sport activities based on the weight of the boat. So those are some of the ones that I know about nationally. I know there's a lot of other things that are in the works in other states in the US, but those are the big ones that I know of, and what is going on in Wisconsin. So final thoughts. We often get really tied up in the specifics of the standard. Is it 500 feet from shore, 550, 600 feet? I don't think that matters that much. It matters that it is scientifically defensible, but we're not looking for, we're definitely, of course, looking to limit impacts. We're not looking for full enforcement. These sorts of laws are going to be like speed limits, where we're looking as much to deter, because people know there's a standard and they might get caught. They might not do it, but they also educate people. They set a community norm that says this lake is not, this lake should not be used for this activity because we have these problems, and because we've set these standards for it, that's what tells you that's the case. So loon nests are a good example where, it may be a lake that even one side of the lake in the prevailing winds has lots of shoreline impact from storms, but the loons have learned where to hide their nests, but don't realize that there are going to be wake boats coming around that don't really care what the prevailing wind direction is, and will send their wakes in whatever direction is best for them doing the sport. they may not even know about the loons. So this is a way to help educate and provide some information on that. So that's all I have, and I thank you for listening. And I'll
Thank
be able
you.
to stick around and answer any questions at the end. So
Thank you, Mike. That was really, really good. And Mike has already agreed to let us see his slides, so I will share them with the notes afterwards. Francis, do you want me to share your slides?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I will get that going. And let me introduce Francis first. Our second presenter is Francis Carmichael. Francis is a past chair as well as the chair of advocacy for Safe Quiet Lakes, a Muskoka, Ontario-based group whose mission is to be a leading voice in promoting safe, quiet waterways and respectful boating practices through education, advocacy, and legislative change. Now, in Canada, Muskoka is one of the heaviest used boating areas, so it's a very important area. And I will share her link to her website in the agenda in the notes afterwards. Looking at Frances's bio on the website, she has a broad experience in the financial markets, but she also spent 2 terms as the Ontario Securities Commissioner and is currently on the board of the Minstrel Foundation and the Lake Joseph North Foundation. So Frances is going to give us a bit of a presentation on the legal perspective for Canada for boating laws, and I just have to get her talk set up here.
And
All
Kathy,
right.
thank you. Are you going to move the slides forward for me, please?
I will, yes.
Yeah, thanks.
I just have to, you'll have to tell me when.
I will. Thank you.
All right. How's that? Can everybody see that?
I can.
That's a good start. All right, go for it, Francis.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We, Safe Quiet, are delighted to be here. I'm going to talk about, that's the final page though, Kathy. Yeah, just to go, yes. I'm going to talk about Canadian boating regulations that pertain to wakes, only wakes. And just a quick few comments, what we'll be talking about today on the next slide, please. So a little bit about Safe Quiet Lakes, our mission, how we work, and then about the Canadian regulatory framework. The big point is that all regulations on boating are federal. There is no provincial or municipal ability to pass regulations. So if we could just go to the next slide. As Kathy said, our mission is to be a leading voice in promoting quiet waterways and respectful boating through education, advocacy, and legislative change. And when we started out in 2011, our focus was only on education and awareness. And we found, though, that in Canada, there were inappropriate or lacking regulations, and that really, if we wanted to make real change in boating behavior, we would need new regulations. So we turned ourselves into an advocacy group and built up our mass, if you like, to a size that the federal government would listen to us. In terms of education, this Boaters Code piece, that was our very first educational piece. And we put a big version of this, like 4 by 5 feet, at all the public boat launches and locks. And then we handed out a postcard size piece whenever we could. And the Ontario Provincial Police handed this out also when they stopped boats. That was our education. The next slide, please. We built a lot of our respect, I think, around the public opinion research that we did. We were fortunate to have a very well-respected public opinion firm do this work for us. So they designed the survey and they analyzed the results. So this protected us somewhat against people saying, oh, you're just saying that. These surveys were very large. There were 3 of them. And the last one in 2021 had 6,000 respondents. And the major takeaway was that the survey was of waterfront property owners. And the major takeaway was that lake experience is deteriorating. People were less happy, and that was due to boat noise, wakes, and speed. These are the big concerns that these surveys show. And they were keen to have further regulation and enforcement. And this has been a change over the last 10 years. People now see that they need new regulations and better marine enforcement. Next page, please. There was still a huge support, this yellow line, for increased education. There was concern about boating under the influence, a big increase in the need for new law enforcement officials on the lakes. And then this was a reverse question. More people felt that there was a need for more regulations, because the question was, do you feel there is no need for additional regulations? And that number has dropped from 37% who didn't see a need in 2013 to 19% in 2021. The rest of them did see a need. This gave us a lot of enthusiasm to go forward and to advocate with the government, the federal government, for regulatory change. So this next page, please. This is a little bit more on the education that we have undertaken, though. This is just focusing mostly on wakes. We educate in a lot of other areas too, but we did a video called Be Wake Aware, and a whole campaign around that. It had 15,000 views, which quite a few. We had no wake signs, and sold quite a few of those, and made numerous speeches at lake associations, annual general meetings, and other sort of boating event, and started a strong social media campaign. So next page, please. So current regulations on wakes, this sign is to say that there are none. There are no regulations in Canada on boat wakes. And in fact, a sign like this, which is our sign, that says no wake, if it were round and enclosed in a round red circle, it would be illegal, because we would then be looking like a government sign. So these are all volunteer, unenforceable signs that we put up around the lakes, because there are no rules about it. Next page, please. So there's no wake regulations such as no wake zones. There's some regulations, and I'll go through them, that are available that can affect the generation of wakes. And in most provinces, there is a speed limit on all inland waterways of 10 kilometers within 30 meters of shore. It's also under the criminal code illegal to boat in a manner that's unsafe to the public. And it would be possible to launch a civil suit for, say, dock damage, but as far as I know, this has never been successfully done or even tried. So there's not really any real regulations. Next slide, please. In Canada, the federal government has the sole jurisdiction over boating on any body of water. There are great big lakes, Lake Ontario, rivers, and even little ponds. And boating includes oil tankers, cruise ships, recreational boats, canoes, paddle boards, every mode of transport you can think of. This regulation includes all signage as well. And the regulations cover equipment, licensing, speed, etc. So a province or a municipality or another layer of government cannot enact their own rules without federal approval. And a good example of this would be noise, where a lot of municipalities or townships would have a noise bylaw. As soon as a person gets out on the water, that bylaw does not apply to them. So there's no regulation of things that occur on the water. Enforcement is delegated various ways to the RCMP, to the Ontario Provincial Police in Ontario, and other police forces. Again, this delegation is Transport Canada's. They approve that delegation. Next page, please. But municipalities can ask the federal government for a vessel operating restriction regulation, or a VOR. And these cover such things as no boats allowed on specific lakes, no power-driven boats allowed, engine size limits, no towing sports, no special events, and a no wake surfing VOR. Again, the municipality must apply for this, and the VOR, a restriction, can apply to a whole body of water, like a whole lake, or maybe just a bay or a little bit of a river. It doesn't need to, and it can apply for, say, a different time of day. There's various variations. So this sounds wonderful, but next slide, please. It's not widely used. There's only 300 in the province of Ontario. And although there's 250,000 lakes, we think, not all of those are recreational lakes, but nonetheless. And the reason that there aren't very many is that only a municipality or a level of government can apply. And the application process is arduous and costly. The applicant must carry out a cost-benefit analysis, show that all other reasonable approaches failed, like education, and that all stakeholders were consulted and that most of them agree. And the grounds for a VOR are public safety and environment, which is good for this group, and the public interest. But putting the application together takes several years. I know one up on Georgian Bay is now townships working on it for the 5th year in a row, with a lot of public meetings. And then currently it takes the Minister of Transport Canada about 2 years to approve it. And this is being speeded up. But this is a very long process, and it is costly for the municipality to put together. Next page, please. But despite all these hurdles, Safe Quiet Lakes is organizing to get effective lake regulation. We're in the preliminary stages of gathering like-minded and engaged partners to address the impacts of boat lakes in Canada. We've had 2 or 3 such meetings with big lake associations, environmental groups, and others coming together. We need to broaden that more to include some municipalities, and Indigenous stakeholders are very important at the federal government. We need their support. Paddling and other water sports associations, and more in the environmental movement. We have compiled existing scientific research and advocacy case studies from around the world. You looked at Germany, New Zealand, all this, and currently are working toward a province-wide legislation for both wake surfing and distance from shore. We favor a province-wide approach because otherwise it's very difficult for enforcement. The lake that I'm on has 2 municipalities. Some lakes have 3 or 4 municipalities. So it would be important to have a common rule that the OPP could enforce and that the public can understand. This is a huge undertaking, but we have had success at this kind of thing before. And I'll just touch on this, which is the next slide, the Decibel Coalition. So Canada does not have a decibel limit on boat engine noise. And it's probably one of the only civilized countries in the world without it. So most states in the United States have it, and the European Union has it. They have the same decibel limit rules. We do not have that. We have some very loud boats without any muffler whatsoever. The current law requires a muffler, but it's very difficult to enforce. So we established a coalition under Safe Quiet Lakes of 65 organizations from across Canada, British Columbia, Alberta, Nova Scotia, Ontario, and Quebec, with 95,000 members in total. And then we started talking to Transport Canada. It was very important you come as a national voice to them because it's a federal organization. And we had fantastic response. And we expect this regulation, the same one that you have, to come in place in 2025. It'll be in the second to last regulatory stage, which is called Gazette 1, in 2024, this fall. And that'd be very exciting because then in the spring of 2025, we will have decibel limits on boat engine noise. So Decibel Coalition shows us that we can have a wake coalition as well and have success in bringing in effective wake regulations. So I think that's it. Yes. And we're really excited to be here. Thank you.
I went too fast there at the last. Sorry, Francis.
No, that's okay. That was
I'm going to stop sharing. Francis, do you mind if we share those slides with the group later?
no, not at all. No.
Okay. Happy to take questions if people want to put the hands up so I can find you. That'd be excellent. Or put it in the chat. I want to thank both Francis and Mike for the two great talks. I'm not seeing very many questions yet. Tracy, and what Tracy first and then Andrew. Tracy, feel free.
Yeah, this isn't necessarily a question, but I can't quite release the info yet, but within a couple of weeks, we'll probably hear word that Maine has passed some wake legislation, so which will extend beyond the 200 feet and does include depth, but doesn't get to the levels that you're talking about. So it's not officially stamped yet, but there's a really good chance that we've come a long way on this issue.
Great.
Cool. Okay.
Great.
Next in line is Andrew Coughlin.
Thank you very much to both of you for those great presentations. Mine was more a comment than a question. There was there's not really been mention of other species at risk that could help us, or perhaps First Nations as well. And I just wonder whether either of the speakers were interested in sort of adding more about it. I was thinking of, with endangered species, certainly I was thinking of some other different bird species, amphibians, reptiles, insects, mollusks, other things that could sort of are really affected potentially by boats and things that could help bring legislation forward.
Yes, I mean, we need to do that. We need to bring in those species and those other groups, like the duck hunters, and everyone who has an interest in the health of the shoreline. So, I mean, that's one of our goals, is to get that broader group, and definitely in the Canadian environment, they must have the support of the Indigenous groups, and that's difficult because they're very fragmented. Not that they don't want to, it's just hard to reach them.
Mike,
Yeah, in Wisconsin, we haven't, other than loons are probably for obvious reasons, they're probably the most telegenic species to be talking about and have the most obvious impact. I'm sure that there are going to be some impact shown to fisheries at some point, though the research in actual impact sort of has lagged behind the research of what are the wave characteristics in both distance and depth. So we just don't, I have some anecdotal stories of fish habitat being destroyed, of plant structures being destroyed, that certainly is going to have an impact to the ecosystems overall, but I don't have anything specific to point to yet. In Wisconsin, and especially in our northern counties, we have a lot of the Native American population has a deep interest and some tribal rights in Monoman, the wild rice beds in the northern lakes. And we're really just beginning to talk to them, kind of as Francis said, about whether there are impacts that are being seen. Some of those lakes that have that aren't probably amenable to wake sports, so there may not be a lot of impact from it yet, but we are definitely looking at it.
That's great. I was thinking of things like black terns as well, that have sort of small floating nests that are endangered in Wisconsin or threatened, sure, and could potentially be brought on board. Thanks.
I'd just say that loons, of course, are so cute, and you'll notice that was our logo for the Decibel Coalition, like muffler on a loon head. But I mean, the other thing, which is that graphic that you showed earlier, is boating safety, and that's our surveys show that there are a lot of people now nervous to go out. Like, there's a big growth in paddle boards, but they're nervous to be on the lake in them. So, really their right to enjoyment has been affected by these large wake and very large wake surfing boats.
Mhm.
I'd also add that paddleboards can be a problem.
To share the space, that's the slogan, yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
used to use kayaks as the example, and then people started talking about these meetups of kayakers where they would raft 100 kayaks together and all have speakers playing the same music. It's like, you can turn anything fun into something that can cause problems. So
This is true. This is true. Denise, if you want to open your mic and speak, go ahead.
Hi, I'm glad to hear that presentation. Thank you, Mike and Francis. Very interesting. I'm representing Coalition Navigation, which is an organization that, well, we want to be all over Canada. And our action is based on scientific studies. And we have two studies that we based our campaign on. Is one that says that the waves of a wakeboat takes at least 300 meters to dissipate before going to the shore. So that means almost 1,000 feet. So it would take a 2,000 feet corridor for a wakeboat not to disturb the shoreline. And this is a study from Quebec University. And we also have another study talking about death. That what, and it says, the first study said that it affects, it mixed the sediments at 5 meters deep. But in 2017, he made another study saying that it's now 7 meters deep. That means 23 feet deep. So we've based all our campaign, sensitizing campaign on that fact. And we hope, we're talking to Transport Canada right now and asking them to use those two, the distance from the shore and the depth, those two elements. There could be a law enforcing that in all over, because every lake, not depending on what the municipality can do about it, but every lake needs to be protected. And the wildlife and the aquatic life in that lake need to be protected. So those big boats going in small lakes and very shallow lakes, they do so much damage. And so that's, I agree with what you do. And Francis, I'm really impressed by all the organization that you have been uniting for your decibel thing. It's just great. We sure hope that we can do that for the wake boat thing. If we get together, we will do that. And thank you for having me in this meeting, Kathy. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm glad you could make it. I'll share Denise's Coalition Navigation website with everybody afterwards. There is English and French, and your choice of language is found on the left-hand side. We don't have any questions. Anybody else have any? I just have one, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, but this is something that Erica said to me that kind of scared me. Mike, Erica said that boats can be run by remote control in Wisconsin.
So I'm trying to. I saw that Erica put that in an email to me too, and I'm trying to remember when that comment came up, and how serious he actually was about that. Was that the warden that
Yes.
made that? So I don't think there's anything that would prevent. I don't think we have a law in the books that would prevent it. And because of generally we have such strong protections of what you can do on the water, and I think this was one of our state wardens that was talking about this at a presentation at one of our conventions, that because the public trust is so strong in Wisconsin, if there's not a prohibition of it, it's probably allowed. So and when I first read it and I kind of remembered back to that, I'm like, yeah, but that's not really going to happen. And then I thought, you wouldn't think that you wouldn't think that 10 years ago, even, you probably wouldn't have thought that we'd be talking about boats that were over 600 horsepowers. There's a paper written by a gentleman in Wisconsin called Load Limits for Lakes that talks about the problems of overcrowding on lakes and the implications for the public trust in Wisconsin for user rights versus other user rights. And he bemoans the 150 horsepower engines in 1994. So, which is, it's the same problem, but we're multiplied by degrees of power that we have to take care of.
Yeah, I mean, and what alarmed me is like what you're saying. These 150 horsepower boats were huge back then, but this is upcoming technology, and I think that's what he's like, this is the future, and it's happening right now, to a lesser degree, but it's something we need to keep our eye on, and we have no legislation or regulations.
Yeah, and I'm kind of remembering more of it now. Was the idea that you would actually be able to surf behind the boat and control it yourself while surfing? Yeah, because it had some kind of, there are already these, like on hydrofoils, you have the dummy switch that if you wipe out, you let go and it stops running. It was basically the same kind of idea. And I believe I've seen a video of that not working and the boat just going off uncontrolled on its own.
And what kind of view do you have from, as you're wakeboarding, as the boats are going slowly, but still you're not seeing ahead, you're way back there. So
exactly.
It was like when he was saying that, I was just like, what? And a lot of people were just sort of, looking wide-eyed at one another during that presentation.
It is a very scary idea. I should mention, as with the Francis's group, as far as I can tell, everybody's work seems to have some research behind it. So Eric and I are looking for presenters to share their research in March and in April so that we can all be up to speed on the research before we move forward with our messaging. So we haven't gotten there yet, and but we're going to try and get some people in to do some presentations on research. I don't see any other presentations. Does Mike? Francis, do you have any last comments?
I'll just say that on research, University of Windsor has finished it. I don't know where it stands. We did a preliminary presentation on it, but we've taken the conclusion that we don't, and it's a bit like Mike's comments, we don't need any more research. I mean, no matter what research we do or compile, our detractors, which are probably the same group that might attack you, like the National Marine Manufacturing Association and Boating United, the Marinas, they're going to attack us no matter what research we have. So really, we have to build a positive case. Here's all this support for taking some form of regulation of wakes, but respecting the fact that people have the right to wake surf and not take that away from them, and put in rules that don't cut out all the lakes in Canada, but allow it a better situation than it is now. And that's all that we can have to be reasonable. There is,
Yeah, I agree with that completely. That has been our stance from the beginning. We're not trying to, we're not judging the activity. I know a lot of people that actually are members of ours that do the activity and really enjoy it, and there are places where it can be done safely and without great impact, and we just have to make sure that happens. Your mention of research made me think that I think I saw that someone had put the Wisconsin Green Fires compilation report they kind of took a bunch of studies together and looked at that. They actually realized they had some computation errors in some of their conclusions, not I don't think huge ones, but it was enough they felt like they should pull it. So I don't think it's actually available anymore on their website. So I think it's worth looking at what they had put out. There wasn't anything that was extraordinarily wrong on it. But to be correct, they had pulled that report. So just in case you look at it, know that.
Okay, terrific. I think unless somebody has another question in the next few minutes, we're pretty good. Thank you, Francis and Mike, for speaking.
Kathy?
Oh, Mark, go for it.
Yeah, just I can't get my Zoom hand to come up, so I'll try to now. And this, I'm looking at this through a very narrow lens at this point, so forgive me for being a nerd about it. But I think one of the things, and Tracy, you could comment on this for me. I think one of the things that has been informative is from the pathology point of view, when we can document with loons that they've been hit by boats. We can't always tell what kind of boat, but again, a way that we can encourage people to note when this has happened, to see if we can have more necropsies performed and things like that. Because Tracy, what I remember with the Maine data is it was last year or the year before that all of a sudden boat hits surpassed lead poisoning as a cause of death in the state of Maine.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it looked like, blunt trauma anyways, and probably most
Yeah.
of those were from
Yeah.
boat strikes, and then, fungal respiratory, and the last was lead.
Yeah.
Third, but yeah.
So
But
again,
then
going back to the data issue, I think the more we can get data on many different things, and as Andrew said before, I think it's not just loons, of course. If we can do this with waterfowl, if we can do it with terns, grebe nests, all sorts of things. Data will speak. It takes time, but it will.
I've wondered more too about game cameras, just
Yeah,
some of
absolutely.
some of the imagery that has been caught already. I think if we could get more of that showing nests being washed out.
Yeah. Well, and it's more than game cameras. I mean, I see the Grenzers on the call too, and I think photographers in general. I mean, we have a scattered few, but significant numbers of images of a jet ski hitting a loon or something of that nature. So yeah.
But Mark, for the wake boat issue, how much do you think the blunt trauma issue will play into that? Just because aren't ballast boats supposed to be less likely to actually cause
Because they're
boat strikes because they're slow
yeah,
speed?
I think they're probably more of a risk to small chicks
Yeah.
than
Right.
getting run over by some of these high-powered boats that are going way too fast.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, the other thing that factors into that too is not just the power of the boat and the speed of the boat, but time of day. I mean, some of this boating takes place very early in the morning or very late in the evening, and loons may not be very visible on the surface of the water. So, and I can tell you from personal experience, swimmers are not always very visible on the surface of the water. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, Denise.
Tracy, you talked about a video showing a loon's nest being washed away. Do you have that video?
Well, it's not a video, but actually Heinrich is on here. It was from Keezer Lake where they caught it with a game camera. And it was a picture of a nesting platform that was being pretty much tipped, the eggs washed out
Yeah.
by the wake. It's a phenomenal photo. So I don't know if Heinrich is still on or not, but
His name is active down
okay.
there.
Yeah, that is a famous picture. That was a one-time shot from a camera that was supposed to monitor just the loons sitting on their nests, and it's something that is sort of made the rounds and clearly showed what a wake, and that was probably not even a wake boat. It's just a regular boat going much too fast for the area. And that's why I think having signs in the neighborhood may make sense, although the people who go fast probably will go fast no matter what.
Yeah. I think I see Linda Grenzer waving her hand down there too. So
I do. Go ahead, Linda.
Yeah.
Another thing is loons are visual feeders. And if the lake is so stirred up from these wakeboards, it's not just boats. It's not just for loons, it's for grebes, it's for mergansers.
Yeah,
They're gonna
well,
see their
and
food.
sure, and things like kingfishers and osprey and so forth, if we're talking about birds. I mean, any of those visual feeders, particularly the ones that have to see through the surface. Yeah.
Right, so that's another thing you could probably do with wake boats.
Mhm.
They stir up the water clarity.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point now that I think about it, because the way we've looked at that issue in the past, the way I've seen it talked about most is in terms of whether it stays it stays murky, whether stuff stays in the water. But if there's enough activity going on the weekends that it's even just on Saturdays and Sundays that the water is bad, that could have an impact on those sorts of birds that need to be able to see down into the water in a way that even if it settles out, it would still have an impact.
Yeah.
Well, and one thing on Walter Piper's studies is he's saying the chicks' weights are way down. And, you know, it could correlate with the boat activity being way up, that they're just not getting fed what they need to be. So it's definitely a possibility.
Well, I should mention, folks, that we are now past the hour. And I
Whoops.
know that the rescue and rehab starts at 5:30, doesn't it, Mark?
It does. I'm working on the agenda. Yeah.
You're working on the multitasking, huh?
Oh, yeah.
So I think we should round up a little bit now. Anybody have any mentions about the subcommittees? Just remember that if you have platform information or wake boat engagement information or even lead engagement information, feel free to drop those into the folders we have prepared. And I will share the notes, and I have both presenters permission to share the slides. This is recorded. And I'm sorry, I should mention that to you, Francis, and to Mike. You both have a right to say, no, I can't share the recording if you are uncomfortable with it. You're both good with
I've
that?
said
Okay.
much worse. So
I didn't say anything too stupid, I don't think so.
I should have mentioned that like an hour ago.
Yeah.
But that's it. So if you have more questions we can ask, if people want to leave, feel free. I'll keep the lines open for another 10 minutes or so. But unless Francis and Mike have to run, and then we'll just close everything
no,
down
I can
now.
hang out.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was tremendous session.
Yep. Thank you for everyone for coming.
Thank you very much for the information.
Thank you very much, everybody, too. Goodbye.
Looks like everybody's leaving and we have no questions.
Okay. Well,
I'm sorry, Hal.
Do you have questions, Andrew?
I don't have any more, no, but
Okay.
I will do.
Heinrich, is that video of yours available somewhere?
picture.
Oh yeah, I can find. It's a still picture. Although no, originally maybe it was a video. I can look for it. Yes.
Yeah. If you don't mind sharing it with me or just sharing it in one of the folders, I think everybody
Sure.
would love to see it.
Yeah,
And make sure
definitely.
you put credit on it, whoever it belongs to.
Yeah.
I can tell people not to share it without your permission. I can't guarantee they'll do that.
I do have a question for Mike. I live on a part of a lake that's only 10 feet deep. It's about 500 acres. And it's part of a larger lake, the Kisa Lake, which is 2,500 acres. And the connection between the two lakes is through a narrow channel. So a boat has to go for about 15 minutes at forward speed only. So is there any chance or anyone anywhere you know that a lake or portion of a lake has been closed to wake boat activity because of the lack of appropriate depth?
I'm trying to think if we have anywhere in Wisconsin that has done that. I can't think of a specific example off the top of my head, though. I in Wisconsin, I think it would be perfectly legal for a local boating ordinance to do that. There already is precedent for other activities to be confined to particular parts of a lake, so you can designate a shallow area is inappropriate for water skiing, or maybe it's designated as an outstanding resource water by our Department of Natural Resources or something. So I would think that I'm not sure where you are, I guess, but I would in Wisconsin, it would definitely be okay.
Really? Oh, surprised. Okay. I think it will be an uphill battle with Maine Fish and Wildlife will probably give us a very hard time, but I think it's worth considering, especially with pending legislation.
From having talked to people from outside of the state, I think we're pretty lucky here that we have the level of local ability to set standards and do those sorts of things. It's a lot more malleable, certainly than it is. I don't know, maybe it's if you only have the federal government to deal with, Francis, maybe that makes at least you know who you're dealing with all the time. But
And they're wonderful people, but it makes it very slow because they have a national view. And
right.
so the decibel thing worked because we were a national organization. Otherwise, they're not as likely to respond.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Right. Any more questions, anyone? I think it probably is time to say goodbye. Everybody seems to be leaving but us. I
Okay.
can't thank you guys enough for attending. It's been great and very helpful. I've learned many things here. It's hard to keep track of all the regulations.
Okay.
Erica, do you have anything to add before we say goodbye?
No, I just like to thank everyone for attending, for Mike and Francis for presenting. It just made this meeting very rich and valuable. So thank you very much, everyone.
It was great
And I will-
getting the international perspective. I appreciate that too.
Yeah, yeah,
Not
it's all
far away.
different, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I'll
Okay.
share all the notes and everything with it later in the week. I have a busy week ahead of me, so it might be Friday before I get them out.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
All right.